All right, so our goal today then is to finish off that problem, calculating the traveling salesman algorithm to calculate a route to be able to go through these different hotels. So just for the background here, we have a set of hotels. There are 36 hotels, and we have road distances between each one of them. If I remember correctly, we ended up having built an array called hotel that is an array of strings that holds all of the names of the hotels, and another one called distance that holds all the data from the grid. So we've got, where there's values here, we've got values. Let's take a look at that code and review it. Should be module 2. And so we've got this procedure here called load arrays. We declare 3 integer variables. One's a hotel count. I'm going to keep track of how many hotels we have to work with. The whole idea here is we would like to, at some point, be able to change the size of this set, add some more hotels into it, and have the code still work. And x and y as integers that we use to control a set of loops. So we're starting off to ask how many hotels do we have by going to our distance sheet, starting in A2, and simulating like a control down arrow. We don't actually select that cell, but we refer to that cell. And so that would get us right here to A37. But because we start on row 2 instead of row 1, we've got to subtract 1 off of that to be able to get to the true number of rows, or true number of hotels that we have. All right, we then use that value that we set, hotel count, to set the size of our 2 variables, our 2 arrays of variables. And so we created one called hotel, one called distance. Because we have not specified how many elements are in the array, this is a dynamic array. We're just telling it we're going to make an array. Get ready, I'll tell you how big to make it later, and that's what we do when we say redim. So we actually set the size of the array with redim, and the good thing about this is that I can use a variable to set the size. When I make a static array, it has to be set before any code starts running, and so I can't use a variable, it won't have a value. But this way I can use a variable expression to set what the size of that array is. Questions to this point? Yes? So could we just say dim hotel and put the size in? And the answer is no, I can't do this, because when I just say dim, it's allocating memory. And it's just setting up that set of variables at that point. And all of my dim statements execute before the procedure starts running. So when I do something to invoke this procedure, it says, oh, we got to run this procedure. How much memory do we need? And it goes through the whole thing wherever the dim statements are, and it says, oh, there's a bunch of dim statements here, allocate the memory. All the memory gets allocated, when I use a dim statement, all the memory gets allocated before the procedure starts running, which means that this right here, hotel count variable, does not have a value by the time the dim statement would be executed. Because this doesn't get a value until this line right here, so it's got to be running. And the dims all happen before the code starts running.
The example with this array, since you're dimming an array, you either have to know the length of the array when you dim it, or like you've done now, redim it later on.
So the question is, so what you're saying is that you either, if you're going to use dim, you have to know the size at that point. And if you're not sure at the size at the beginning of your code, then you have to declare it as a dynamic array without saying the size here, and then redim it later to set the size. And that is exactly right. So, yeah, it would be nice if we could just say dim and put a variable expression here, but we can't. It's got to be a constant expression.
So when it's set to dynamic, how much memory does it actually allocate?
The question is, when it's sent to dynamic, how much does it actually allocate? And the answer is, I don't know. It's not very much. It's probably 0. It might be 0. It might not allocate any memory at all for the variable. It's got to do something to keep track of the fact that it's there. But it's an insignificant amount, and it may not even allocate any of the variable at all. It's just, we're setting up the structure saying we're going to be able to make a dynamic array. Other questions? Okay, so with those arrays then sized, we're ready to go ahead and fill the values into it. And so we are going to go ahead and do a loop here that loads up the names of the hotels. So x is going to iterate while x moves from the value 0, the very first entry in the array, up to whatever the upper bound of hotel is. And of course, the upper boundary of that hotel is hotel count minus 1. So could I have just as easily put hotel count minus 1 where I have upper bound hotel? Exactly the same value. So either one of those would be, and it's not that one is even preferred than the other. Either way would be just fine. And so this will iterate 36 times as x goes from 0 to 35. And we're going to plug a value into, the first time through, the number 0 slot in the hotel array. And it's just going to be whatever value is in the number 2 row, first column of our distance sheet. And so this value will go into the first slot of the hotel array, then this one, then this one, then this one. We finished off yesterday doing something that's a little bit more complex, and that is a nested loop. So here what we're saying, let's just look at the inner loop first for review, is we are going to say x equals 0 to upper boundary, so it's exactly the same number of times as we did up here, once for each hotel. And now we're saying that the distance array, this time though, we're going to be looking at 2 variables. So I guess we got to think about the while loop as well. Y starts at 0, x starts at 0, and then we hit this line, and so we'll be looking at the 0, 0 position, meaning that we're going to put a value right here, upper left-hand corner of that array, if you want to think about it as a grid. Then we're changing the value of x. Y is still 0. We get to next x, takes us to the top of the loop. Y is 0, now x is 1, and so the next time I write to the array, it's going to be here, 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 here. And so that first loop is going to run right across this portion of my array and fill those values in. Once I've finished going through that loop once, I'm out, I exit out of that loop, I get to the next y, I go back to the top, y now becomes 1. Here's the answer to your question. I get to the x here again, and now x is set back to 0. X equals 0. That actually does the assignment. And then to the upper boundary again. So now y is 1, and x goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so by the time I hit that loop the second time, y is moved to 1, and I'm going to pop across this. I finish that loop, I get out, y goes 1 more, x gets set back to 0, and it runs through and fills up that whole array.
So right now, just to get a high level view, you're just grabbing the...
So the question is, so right now, we're just grabbing the information from the top right corner, and presumably you mean this information over here, and filling up that array. Sort of. We are definitely getting all this information, but right now we're also getting this information as well. So we are going across every single row, even though your point is, why read these? There's nothing there. You're right. We don't need to read those. In fact, we're going to modify it here in just a second. So, but that's what we've done so far. Now it turns out I really don't even need all this space right down here. I mean, all the information I need is over here. But my array is going to be rectangle. It's not, I can't make a triangular array. You know, I could probably make some other kind of, but it's not an array. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just duplicate the other half of this array down here as well. So right now, if I want to see the distances between the Phoenician and every other hotel, the way I would see them is I would say, well, here's the distance between the Phoenician and this one. Here's the one between that and Salt Lake. Here's that one in Phoenix, Scottsdale. Here's the distance between the Phoenician and itself. And then I make a right turn here, or a left turn, depending which way I'm facing. Anyway, and then here's the distance between the Phoenician and, apparently I deleted one. Anyway, whatever that one is. And then it goes across right here. But if we were to copy this part of the information from here, can I transpose it and just paste it in? Transpose. If we were to copy that information here, now I can just look at one row, and that row, without having to think about where I have to turn and whatever, that row now has information, the distance information between the Phoenician and every other hotel in the set. You see it? So we're going to, the array is rectangular anyway. Let's go ahead and fill that whole array up. But before we do that, let's start by saying let's only bring in the information that we need. So instead of, right now the way the code runs is it goes across all of these. Now what I want it to do is I want it to say, you know what, don't do this one, just start here. So the first time through the loop, I want to start at, I'm on row 0, start on column 1, and go across till the end. When I get to row number 1, I want to start at column number 0, 1, 2. So how do I change this code? Go ahead.
For the smaller for loop, the X for loop,
So you're saying is that for this for loop,
you could, instead of starting at 0, start at like Y, or Y plus 1 or something.
so what you're saying is instead of starting at 0 every time when I get here, that's exactly what we said the problem was, is that we're starting at 0 each time we get to this row. You're saying don't start there. We want to start, when Y is 0, we want to start X at 1. When Y is 1, we want to start X at 2. So you're saying don't say X equals 0 to whatever. Say X equals Y plus 1 to the upper boundary. Yeah, that's perfect. So now, when Y is 0, X is going to start at 1. And so that'll be the first one that we read. And then X will go across. Pop, 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 pop. When Y, then I'm going to finish that loop. Y will move up to 1. I'll start X again. X is going to be start at 1 plus 1. It'll start at 2. And then go across. Let's just see if that one works. I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint here. And I will run load arrays. Loop. And let's take a look. So I should be able to look at that first row. That was where Y is 0, X is 1. And I should see that first value. 0, 1. 6, 19, 13. 6, 19, 13. And if I go a couple more, let's just increment both of those by 1. And I should pick up 653, 16. 1 and 2. 653, 16. So it looks like I've got it. And I could, probe around a little bit more, but I'm pretty comfortable that we've got the data in here. Okay. So now we're only reading the, this is, folks, this is kind of this is one you got to wrap your head around a little bit. How many of you are looking at that going, whoa? Anyone here? How many of you are looking at that going, oh yeah, no problem, I totally got it? About a third of the class. I'm supposing the rest of you are looking at that, either checking your email, or you're looking at it going, there's something to think there. So, and this is really the first time that we have made a for loop that does not start with a literal expression, where we are saying, this is going to be different each time we hit this. Okay, so now the next part of this task is to fill in the off diagonal. So right now these are all blank. How do I do that? Any thoughts? So let's think about this one. When I write to this one right here, when my row is 0 and my column is 0, 1, 2, I want to write to this one right here. Any thoughts?
You just want to interchange the row.
Yeah, let's think about it. So here, row 0, column 2. Here is row 2, 0. Let's see. 0, 1, 2, 3. Row 0, column 3. The analogous place is here, which is row 0, 1, 2, 3, column 0. It's just switching the indices. Would push me from any location here to its analogous position over here.
I guess I'm confused as to why we need to do it. And don't we have all the data that we want? I guess I don't understand why.
Yeah, so all the data are here. But if we do copy the data down here, then in terms of being able to solve this problem, what it means is when I'm trying to figure out who's the closest to the Phoenician, I can look at this row and this row only. If I've got the data, if the data aren't here, and I want to see who's closest to the Phoenician, I've got to look across this row up to the diagonal, and then I've got to go up. We could do it, but believe me, it's way more complex. You'll be happy we did this. We're allocating the memory anyway. It doesn't cost us any more to do it. So let's go ahead and do it, because it'll make the rest of the problem a lot smoother. All right, so I'm just going to copy this line, and I'm just going to flip these indices. So I'm going to write to 0, 3, and then immediately write the same value to 3, 0. In fact, let me comment that out. I'm going to comment that out, run it again. So that's not currently being run. So here I can look at 0, 3 and get that value. 385, 385. But if I flip these, 3, 0, what should I get? Yeah, 0. Why 0 instead of blank? Because the array is an array of numeric variables. I can't make a numeric variable blank. Closest thing I got, 0. Got to be a number. Okay, so now I'm going to enable this line that does the off diagonal, and I'll run this code again. Now let's look at distance 3, 0. It's got 385. Look at 0, 3. It also has 385. So now my array is fully populated. What's it going to be on the diagonal, 3, 3? Did I ever write to the diagonal? Is there ever a time when x and y are the same value? No, because x always starts off at 1 more than y is. They're never the same value. So I've never written to the diagonal. What's the value on the diagonal? Yeah, the value there is 0 because that's the default value. It happens to be that I want 0 there. I mean, if I wanted something else there, I'd have to put something, but it happens to be exactly what I want. Because the diagonal says how far is it from the Phoenician to the Phoenician? That's 0. So the default value happened to be what I wanted there. That was nice. Okay, so I think we've built the structure that we need to be able to start solving the problem. Now let's think about how are we going to solve the problem. So if I come back to my sheet of arrays, maybe I'll name this arrays. So if I come down to my sheet of arrays, I now have these two arrays nicely built. One called hotel, it's here, has the names in it. One called distance, has all my distances in, zeros on the diagonal. Talk to me about an algorithm. What is it going to take for me to, we know the algorithm. Start in Salt Lake, find the closest city we haven't been to. Go to that city, find the closest city we haven't been to, and keep doing that, and that will build the route. But how are we going to keep track of the route? Ultimately, we're going to say Salt Lake City. I happen to remember from last time I taught this class, the next location is number 7. It's in Las Vegas. So we're going to say number 1, hotel number 1. Number 0 is somewhere in LA. Number 1 is the one in Salt Lake. Number 7 is the one in Las Vegas. And then we're going to go somewhere down to Los Angeles somewhere. So we're going to go 1, 7, and then some other numbers. How are we going to keep track of that? Any thoughts on how to keep track of it? In the back. Yeah, we could create another array. Let's do it. I'm going to call this other array. I will call this one route or route, depending on what part of the country you're from. And this one is going to be an array of integers. And it will be numbered the same. And I'm only showing 1 through 20 here just because it's what fits on the screen. Of course, it's 0 through 20. Of course, it's really 0 through 35 with the current data set that we have. And so what I'm headed for here is to say start in Salt Lake City. Start in Salt Lake City, 1. Go to Las Vegas, 7. Go to whatever the next one is. I don't know what it is. So that's how I'm going to build the route. Could I build the route by putting the names of the hotels into an array? Yeah, ultimately, that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to say you're going to go to Salt Lake City. I mean, I'm not just going to present a bunch of numbers to my user when we're done. But it's pretty easy to get from a hotel number to a hotel, isn't it? Yeah, that's exactly what the hotel array will do for me. If I want to know what hotel number 7 is, question mark, hotel, 7. I'm asking for the number 7 position in the hotel array. And the hotel array holds the names of them, so I can get from the index number to the name of the hotel easily. This is what the hotel array does for me. So we'll keep track of this by numbers. So now the only other thing I've got to do is I need some way to be able to tell, have I been to the hotel? So how should I keep track of, or how should I be able to know, have I been to the hotel? Can't do in string with the array. But what you're saying is, I'm keeping a list of all the hotels I'm trying to go to. Can't I just look in it and see, have I been to that hotel? In other words, I'm trying to decide, should I go to hotel number 7? And I just have to look in that. So right, we're going to have to do our own in-string function. It's not really an in-string function. I forgot to bring the Boggle game down. Would you go get it for me? Right, so we'll need to do that. And that's really going to be the building blocks that we need. So let's go ahead and set this route array up. So we'll declare it in the same way we do the other ones. Dim route. Okay, let's vote on it. How many say route? How many say route? I'm staying with route. In the spirit of our current political climate, I'm just going to go with the way the political winds are blowing. It'll be an integer. Dim route as integer. And right here where I'm redimming the rest of them, I'll redim route as well. Now, here's a problem. What's the default value for this array going to be? When this array is created, is it going to be blank? It's going to have a potload of zeros in it. Potload is the technical term for that. Now, the suggestion that we had for how to do this was, we'll just check to see if we've been, when we're trying to decide, should we try to go to that hotel? Is that a hotel that's allowed to go to? The way we're going to tell is, have we been to that hotel? Let's suppose that the next hotel we would want to go to after Las Vegas is this one, the Sheraton Los Angeles Downtown Hotel. I don't think it is, but let's suppose that is. So in fact, that's LA. I'm just going to bring that over here onto my arrays. LA. So I've gone to Salt Lake. I've said, who's the next closest to Salt Lake? It turns out the closest one to Salt Lake is Las Vegas. I don't want to go back there, but I won't because I said, you know what? Yeah, I've already been there. Don't consider number 7. And now the next one is Los Angeles. Am I going to be able to get to Los Angeles with this algorithm? Can I get from Las Vegas to Los Angeles? What do you think? Yes or no? Some of you are saying no. Why not?
There's already a 0.
Yeah, there's a zero. It happens that we got a bunch of zeros here. And our algorithm is currently going to look at that. We're going to ask, hey, is 0 in the array? Yep, we must have already been there. Do you see the problem? So we've got to do something so that we don't think that we've been to Los Angeles before we've been to Los Angeles. So how should we do it? Yep.
Do U-bound route +1.
What you're saying is I don't have to look across the whole thing. I can only look as far as I've been. That's a pretty good trick.
Actually, I was saying, like, if you have 35, put 36 everywhere.
What you're saying is, since that was a pretty good trick, you didn't think of it, I thought of it, but that was a pretty good trick. But your other trick's a pretty good one too. So what you're saying is, listen, what we're saying is we just got to get a value in there that's not 0, and not 7, and not 12, and not any legal hotel name. And so you're saying 36, just one higher than is possible. I like it. And we've got to put that in for each loop. I've already got a loop here that goes across, one from the upper boundary. I'm populating hotel, so let's populate our route there as well. We're putting the default route in here. So route sub x. And here's one I like even better than 36, -1. It's not going to be any of my indices. My arrays don't go down to negative numbers. I don't even have to worry about what it is. I don't care how big it is. Negative 1 is not going to be a valid value. And because they're integers, integers can be negative. So I'm good with that. And so now if I think about how this is going to start off, these are all going to be negative ones. So I'll go ahead and plop that in. So now when I ask, is 0 there already? The answer is 0 is not there. Okay, good. So the other idea is saying, hey, when you're checking in the route, only check to see as many links as you've been. Yeah, that's a pretty good idea too. What we would have to do is we would have to keep track of which step we are in, which presumably, since we're getting ready to write to the next step, we could tell that pretty well as well. We might go ahead and do both of these approaches. We'll do this approach first, and if we have time, we'll modify it so that we can only look at the part of the route that we need to look at. Very good. Okay, I think with this structure now in place, and of course, remember, these really aren't the arrays, right? This is just a visual representation of the arrays. The arrays are non-visual, they're in memory, we can't see them. That's why having something I can kind of point at here, just on the worksheet, is fine. Okay, so load arrays has done what we wanted it to do. Here it is. Now I'm going to come down to our calc distance, and this is going to be the one that when you say, hey, I'm trying to calculate the distance for the route, let's go ahead and build it. I'm going to start this one off by saying, load up the arrays. Load arrays. So I'm calling my load arrays procedure. Build and populate the arrays. All right. Next, we start to build the route. Let's for simplicity's sake, let's just go ahead and hard code our starting location of Salt Lake City. And so the way I specify the starting location is route sub 0 equals 1. Okay, if we have someone who needs full credit for class participation, talk me through this line and explain to me why this says start in Salt Lake City. There's kind of two parts here. There's a part that says start. Where does it say? At what point do we say start? And at what point do we say Salt Lake City? Anyone want to kind of take a stab at that? Counseling going on. Hey, this is how it is. Say this. So the part that says Salt Lake City is the 1, right? So hotel number 1 is Salt Lake City. Here is hotel number 0. Here's hotel number 1. The part that says start is the 0. So the number 0 position in our route is, that's where we start. It's the top, it's the very first position in the route array. And we're using the route array to keep track of what our route is. So that's how we would say start in Salt Lake City. Okay, so next we've got to say find the next city that we haven't been to. So that's easy. We're going to say route sub 2 or sub 1 is equal to next city. That was easy. That's the procedure we still have. It's a function we still have to write. But at this part, that's all it's going to be. Find the next city. In fact, maybe I'll go ahead and pass it. Find the next city closest to hotel number 1. So I was just at 1. Now find me the next closest one to number 1. I've got to write that function, but that's what the call will look like.
Is that the same with load arrays, or load arrays some method that Excel always has?
So load arrays is the procedure that we just built right here. So this is the one that's just populated. We've got our arrays declared here dynamically. So this is going to set the size of those arrays and then fill them up with the data we need to solve the problem. All right, so we're going to have to make our next city function. It's going to return a value. I'm telling it, hey, I'm at city number 1, give me the next nearest city. And so I'm going to call it next city. I'm going to send it current city as an integer, and it's going to return an integer. Whew. All right. So here's where we've got to write something that says, how do we figure out the next city? And so thinking about this data, I've got to look across this array, and I got to find the smallest value that meets what criteria? The smallest value, not counting ones I've been to. How many cities have I been to at this point? Just one. And so it happens that that's going to take care of this diagonal, which is always 0. And so I don't have to worry about saying, hey, ignore the diagonal, because by the time I get here, I've already been to the city that'll be on the diagonal. So all I have to do is say, find the next nearest one that I haven't been to yet. So that means I got to make a function that tells, have I been there? So, we didn't get very far into this one before we realized we got to get another function in here called been there. So let's go ahead and, we've got to build this one, but let's go ahead and make the function called been there. And I'm going to pass it here a city to look at. All I want to know is, have I been to that city? All right, this shouldn't be too tough. All I have to do is take whatever value was passed into the function, look across my route array, and say, is that value in there? So pretty straightforward. Dim x as an integer for x equals 0 to the upper boundary of route all right, so if city, the number that's passed in, is equal to route sub x, right, the current slot I'm looking in, let's think about it. If I look at my array here, I'm looking through the route. Let's say I passed in 3. The value passed in is 3. It's going to say x is equal to 0, and it looks at route sub 0. Is that a 3? No. X is now 1. We look at route sub 1. Is that a 3? No. Is that a 3? No. Is that a 3? No. We'll get across the whole array, and if we don't ever find a match, that means we haven't been there. And so if I don't ever find a match here, this thing should return false. So let's make it as a Boolean type. So it's going to return true or false. If I don't ever change it, what's it going to return? I mean, if I don't ever tell it true or false, what will it return? Default value for Boolean is false. So if I don't ever find a match, I don't have to do anything. It's going to return false. So I only have to make a change if I find a match. So if the value that was passed in, city, is equal to the value that's in the current slot of the route I'm looking at, then we're going to do something. What do? We set the name of the function equal to true. Any reason to keep looking? If I find it in the route again, first of all, I shouldn't find it in the route again, but if I did, would I change it to something besides true? Extra true? Really true? You can count on this for sure? No, it's true. There's no reason to keep looking. And so here, exit 4. No reason to keep looking. And then we're done. So this is going to return true if it's a city, if the city's index exists in the route. Okay, so now I'm ready to only consider cities that I have not yet been to. So now let's think of our next city. And this should sound kind of familiar because we're trying to find the index number of the smallest value in the array. Was that homework assignment hard? How many were saying that was one of the harder homework assignments? A few of you are saying that? Yeah, it's a new, if you haven't worked with arrays yet, it's a kind of a new way to think. Okay, so here's how I'm going to do it. Dim, I'm going to call something short value or short distance as a single precision floating point number. And I'll declare another one called short index as an integer. And I'm going to have to look through, I'm going to have to look across that dimension of the array. So I'll need x as an integer as well. Okay, now the trick is, what I want current city for is I want to know the current city tells me which part of my distance array I'm concerned with. And I can either look at the column of the current city or the row of the current city. They have exactly the same information. And so I'm just going to iterate across that set of values here for x equals 0 to the upper boundary of what? Trouble is, I'm working with distances here. The distance array has 2 dimensions. If I ask for the upper boundary of the distance array, what is it going to, I got 2 dimensions. Which one do I mean? Well, I can tell it which dimension I mean. So I could say upper bound of of distance, comma 1. The upper boundary of the number 1 dimension. Or I could just say hotels, or hotel. It's called hotel. They're the same size. I know they're the same size. Debug.print distance sub, and I'm going to do my current city as my first index, and then x. It is really tempting to come here and put dot value because it looks a lot like objects we've worked with before. We're working with rows and columns. Cells, give me the row, give me the column, dot value. But I can't do that here because an array is not an object. It's just a group of variables. There are no methods, there are no properties to the array. It's just a value. And so that's enough by itself. Okay, so if I run this code, my calc distance, it should load up the arrays. It should set this first position, and then it should call next city, passing it a 1, and then it should print off all of the distances from Salt Lake City. So before I dive more into working up this algorithm, I want to check to see, have I got that part working? So I'll put a breakpoint here, and I'll go ahead and run that whole thing. I'm going to clear off my immediate window, and I will run that again. Just want to make sure I really have gotten the right values. 691.13, 653.16. 691, 653. So I'm feeling pretty good about having the right values. Any questions on how this narrows it down to just that one set of values from the distance array? You're okay with this? Okay, so now as I'm looking at one of these, I just need to find out, is the current distance that I'm looking at, and that's what I have right here, it's the current distance number. I just want to know if that's a possible contender. Could that be my shortest distance? And to do that, I better set up a distance to start with. So let me get short distance as an initial value. In the homework, how many of you took an approach like this where you're looping through and keeping track? How many of you did kind of an approach similar? That's kind of how I was hoping you would do it. There are simpler ways to do it using functions that are built into Excel, but I wanted you to get experience with loops. And of those that did that approach, how many of you set your initial value of your potentially smallest value to the first value in the array? Yeah, that's a reasonable thing to do. That won't work for us here. Why not? because the first value in my array may very well be a city I've already been to. And so I better not just point it to that one. I'm going to have to give it another value. So I'm going to set it to some value that I know has to be larger than any distance I'm going to find, so that when I get to the first one I'm comparing to, that will become my new contender. Full credit for class participation if you happen to know roughly the circumference of the Earth. Chances are that's not going to be shorter than one leg on my distance. I'm going to go around the whole world to be able to get there. Yeah, you got it?
Like around 25,000 miles.
Yeah, about 25,000 miles. Yeah, it's closer to 24,000 miles, but I said roughly, so 25, 1, 2, 3. Whoops. Numlock off. 25, 1, 2, 3. And insert back on. Okay, so my short distance is really, really long. So now the first time I make a comparison to any of my distances, which are only in the hundreds of miles, then I'm going to say, aha, the first one I've looked at, that's going to become my first potential next nearest city. So now I'm going to say if the distance I'm looking at is less than my short distance, oh, that's a potential. Then we'll do something. So if it's shorter than my short distance, it's a possibility. Great. What's the second thing we have to consider? So we're only going to think about it as when we look at that number, we go, oh yeah, that's smaller. Okay, now we have to pass the second hurdle, which is what? Have we been there yet? So if it's shorter than that, then hey, this is a possibility. This is a possible next link. Now we got to check if we've been there. If been there. Now, been there, we have to pass a city that we're asking if we've been there. So what do I put right here? Yeah, X. X is the city I'm currently looking at, and so if been there X, that's going to return true if I have been there, but I'm only going to consider it if I have not been there, so I need to reverse the answer here. It actually reads pretty well. If not been there, X, then I've got a next possible contender. And so I'm going to set my new short distance. That's now the distance to beat. So short distance is now equal to the distance that I'm currently looking at. And I need to also keep track of the index where I found that, because ultimately that's what I got to return, the city number. I got to remember the city number. And so that's short index. Short index equals X. So now I'm going to have to go through all those cities. Once I've been through them all, the short distance is going to be whatever that shortest distance was. I don't really care about what the distance is at this point. I just want to know what's the index that I found that short distance at, and I will set the return value of my city right to there. Thank you. Whoops. Whew. That should calculate the next leg in my route. Can we see it? I'm going to look across that whole dimension. I'm going to ask, hey, is the distance I'm looking at shorter than my contender? If it is it a city that I haven't been to? Aha, that's my next possible contender. Remember where I found that and keep going. Unlike down here where we found a match, we were done looking, here we've got to look through them all. The shortest distance might be the very last column, so we've got to go through them all. Yeah?
Can we address same city, total C0 for the same city?
So yeah, that's right. The smallest value here is 0. And the way we've set this up is we've said we're going to that city first. So go to Salt Lake City, put Salt Lake City into my route, and then ask for the next city. And so, yeah, we don't have to explicitly say, hey, when the indices are the same, ignore it. Or if the value is 0, ignore it. Because it will be handled by the fact that it's a city we've already been to. Whew, I'm kind of excited to run this, see if it works. I mean, we still got to do something to build the whole route, but I think we've gotten what it takes to get the next leg. Seemed like a lot of work just to figure out go to Las Vegas. Wouldn't it have been easier to look on a map? There's nothing any remotely closer. I mean, Las Vegas is clearly for this step. Yeah, but this was a lot funner. This was more fun. Okay, so I'm going to stop my code. I'm going to put a breakpoint here on the end of my calc distance, and I will run this. Whoops, I got a breakpoint in here I wanted to finish off. Okay, so it's gone through there. Let's take a look at, it's going to kind of peek here into the route. So route sub 0 should be 1. After all, I set it to 1 right here. And then I've set route 1 equal to next city, passing it a 1. Let's see what route 1 is. If memory serves me correctly, it should be Las Vegas. City number 7. There it is. I found number 7. So now I'm ready to write a loop to just calculate off the rest of the array. But it turns out, whenever I've got a loop that's not just really, really simple, I like to write a few lines as if I were writing the whole loop out by hand. So let me think about what this has to be. So I'm going to fill route 0, 1. This part's easy. 0, 1, 2, 3. Now next city 1, when I get to here, I'm going to have to pass it next city Las Vegas. Oops. Next city Las Vegas. And then here, what do I have to pass it? I have to pass it whatever came back when I passed it next city Las Vegas. Ugh. So 0, 1, 2, 3 I can do. 0, 1, or 1, 7, whatever that is, that's a little tougher. How am I going to do it? It's possible. It requires a little more thinking about it. How am I going to do it? Yep. Can't I just use, use route 2? Yeah, you're right. Because here, this calculated a 7 and it dumped it into route 1. This then is going to use that 7 that's at route 1, and it's going to dump its result right into here. And so instead of actually putting a 1 here, I will put here route sub 0. Here, I will say I want to look at route sub 1, which means here, just as the answerer said, route sub 2. Whoa. Route. So this gets a little bit complex here. But see, I'm putting my 1 into route sub 0. I need a 1 here. There it is. That's going to return something. I'm going to dump that into route sub 1. I feed it to my next one. And so now, instead of having this kind of crazy vector of numbers, I've got another series that I can do just with the variable. So that'll be pretty good. I'll go ahead and set up. I can see that now. I'm going to go ahead and set up my loop. Dim x as an integer. Whoa, wait a minute. Is that going to be a problem? Because while this is running, I'm going to have x up here, and I'm going to be calling an x down here. Is that going to mess up my x up here? No. When I declare a variable in a subprocedure, it's totally isolated from anything that happens outside of the subprocedure. So even if I got another variable with the same name, not a problem. It'll keep 2 different copies. It'll remember that one's in one subprocedure, one's in a different subprocedure, not a problem. I'm still going to start off Salt Lake City that way, but now I will say for x equals, the first number I'm going to need is a 1 or a 0. I'll do a 1. For x equals 1, 2, hotel count. Yeah, I've got to fill up that whole, not hotel count, upper boundary of hotel. And I'll put a next in down here. A next. Next. And so this one I'm going to replace, this one will replace with x, and this one I'll replace with x minus 1. And that will automatically do the rest of these. That should build out the rest of the whole route.
What's the count that we're upper bounding?
Oh, not count, thank you. Hotel. All right, so I'm just asking how many hotels are there? I've got to fill out, it could be route. It probably makes more sense to say route here. I got to fill out the whole route. I've already put in the number 0 slot in the route, and so I'm just going to go from 1 to the upper boundary. It looks deceptively simple here, doesn't it? I mean, you really had to kind of think through that to come up with something that was so elegant for this. I'm going to go ahead and run that. Bloop. And now let's take a look at my route. So there's route sub 1 is 7. Route sub 2 is Hotel 12. Kind of hard to see. So watch this, right? If I want to know the name of Hotel 12, what do I have to do? Yeah, the hotel. Let's do it right here. I could say Hotel sub 12. But this is 12 all by itself. So instead of 12, I'll say I want the hotel at the number 2 position in my route. That'll give me the name of that hotel. Go to the number 3 position. That's the next one. That's in Anaheim. I don't know where the Sheridan Suites Fairplex is, but apparently it's somewhere near Anaheim. This one's also in Anaheim. That makes sense. 2 Anaheim hotels right next to each other. Next we get, that's the one I just had in there. Did I just put it over the same thing? I hope so. Cerritos, also kind of in the Los Angeles area. Long Beach, yeah, I'm kind of right down in there. All right, so let me go ahead and actually dump the route off somewhere. Where shall we put it? Distance, properties, arrays. I guess I'll put it here on sheet 2. I'll just start it in column 4 of my sheet 2. And I'll just do it, I could do it in the same loop, but I'm going to go ahead and make a separate loop for it just to isolate it. I'm going to say that sheet 2 sheets, which one do I want? Sheet 2 dot value, dot cells, row number x plus 1, column number 4 dot value equals route sub x. Oh, and I want this to start at the very beginning of the route, so this has got to start at number 0. Sheets, sheet 2 dot cells. Insert, close parenthesis. So now this should dump that route off.
So you want x equals 0?
X should start at, X should start at 0. Go to the upper boundary of the route. We're going to write out to this sheet. So when x is 0, I want to write to cell number 1, row number 1. When x is 1, row number 2, and so forth. O is column 4, that value. So that should put out the whole. I don't want to do the route. I want to do the hotels of the route. And there's the route that we're doing. Let's just look at this. Does it make sense? Start in Salt Lake. Go to Las Vegas. We're down here somewhere in Anaheim. Anaheim, Cerritos, Long Beach, the Los Angeles Airport, Beverly Hills. Oh, and then, I don't know where Monarch Beach is, but I know where La Jolla is. Where's that? San Diego. So we kind of came down Las Vegas, LA, down to San Diego. That looks pretty good. San Diego, Palm Springs. Bakersfield. Oh, so I kind of came out Central California, but Bakersfield is Northern California. Well, maybe Upper Central, but anyway, it's up there. So could you think of a better way to do this route? You go to LA, then to San Diego, then back up? Probably should go San Diego first and then pick up LA on the way north. And you could probably pick up Palm Springs on the way to San Diego. That wouldn't be a bad way to go. So yeah, you could have done better. In fact, watch what happens. We go up here, San Francisco, that doesn't look too bad. We're up here to Seattle, and then bingo. Where's Scottsdale? Arizona. We were pretty close to Phoenix when we were in Vegas, about, what is it, 4 or 5 hours away? But we passed it, we went all the way up the coast, and then back down to Phoenix. So you see the problem with the next nearest city algorithm? Yeah, it probably isn't going to give you the best route, but it's one that we could calculate. And the whole purpose here wasn't really to find the shortest route. It was to get some experience working with arrays. Mission accomplished. Okay, so there we go.